Hello everyone, how's it? I want to talk about the South African Post Office, SAPO. The South African Post Office has been recently put under provisional liquidation. Provisional liquidation is basically like a court order ordering an investigation into whether or not the company should be liquidated. In other jurisdictions, this kind of decree would be called a decree nisi in other jurisdictions, but here in South Africa we call it a provisional liquidation. So that means that there's investigations going on currently to ascertain whether or not South African Post Office services assets will be liquefied. So to liquefy assets means then to convert them to cash. That means to sell the assets. So the situation with the South African Post Office is that the company has a lot of debt and it's unable to pay its creditors, which means that one of its clients, one of its creditors has actually lodged a charge, laid a charge against the South African Post Office that these guys are unable to satisfy their obligations. So they should be, put under liquidation so that the creditors could be paid back, at least whatever portion is possible to pay back. But I want to give a brief history of the South African Post Office, right? This is a very old institution in the country. I mean, it goes back to the days of, in its modern form, it started back in the days of the Portuguese explorers, in the 1500s. I remember there's a guy called Pedro de Ataide, or Pedro de Ataide. They had a fleet that faced a storm along the Garden Route, the coast of the Garden Route. And I think it was a fleet of about 3 ships at least. And I think Bartholomew Diaz was also there. His ship was also there. So these ships were shipwrecked. They faced a storm in that region, in the Mossel Bay area. And this guy, Pedro de Ataide, what he did was, when he got to the shore, he actually wrote the report, detailing the horrific disaster. He wrote a document, a letter basically, and then he put it inside a boot. And then what he did is that he suspended it from a tree. I think it's a milkwood tree. And then, basically, I think a few months later, the guy to whom the letter was addressed actually found that letter suspended from that tree inside a boot. And I think this kept on being a tradition. People used that milkwood tree in Mossel Bay as some kind of post box, you see. So as a result, today in Mossel Bay, there's a tree. They call it the post office tree. It's actually that same tree that Pedro de Ataide used to leave that letter. So that tree today is a tourist attraction. It's a monument, it's a historical monument. It's still there in Mossel Bay. You can check it out, post office tree. And then next to the tree, there's actually a boot that's used as a monument as well. Because remember, Pedro actually used that boot to put the letter. So that was back in the 1500s, I think 1504, if not between 1503 to 1510, in one of those years. You can always check it out. I'm just giving a brief history. So that's one of the earliest incidents of the post office itself in South Africa, from the Portuguese in the 1500s to the English and the Dutch during the colonial era, where they used multiple forms of transport, from vehicles to railway to airplanes to operators, post office transportation. Even our fathers and our mothers, during colonial era, used letters a lot, to communicate with their families when the men were in the mines, in the cities, building the country. Because we built this country. Our grandfathers, our great-grandfathers built this country. They mined the gold and the minerals. They built the roads and the factories, amongst others. And they used the post office, until it was formally built and declared as the South African Post Office. And under the post office, we have the South African Post Bank, which is the savings bank. I think a lot of people go there they use the post office to get paid their social grants, pensions, even this thing that Ramaphosa is doing with the 350 rands, paying people. What is it called? The relief fund. So the post office is a very important part of the country, you know. Obviously, it has experienced its own decline in the face of digitization because a lot of people use emails and social media and WhatsApp, and it's faster, you know, it gets to the person instantly, and we don't have to wait for delayed messages and letters. But also courier services, people have private alternatives, you see, that take, you know, much less time. Instead of waiting 3 months for your parcel to reach maybe the United States and all that, or to reach another city in South Africa, you know, you can just send it via a private courier. I'm not going to mention names, but you can send it via private courier, and it's going to take 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, depending on the vicinity. So there's a lot of competition for the post office space and other services that they offer. And you know, in South Africa, we have a very developed banking system. So a lot of people just choose private banks, commercial banks, transactional banks, opening different accounts there, business banking and all that. We have a very developed banking system, as unfair as it is, but it's hugely developed. So now, given that context, that the post office itself is facing a lot of you know, robust competition, they have a huge problem of incompetency and maladministration and corruption, amongst other things. So now they've been unable to pay rent, to pay employee benefits. So employee benefits include salaries, medical aid contributions, pension fund contributions, and other employee benefits as stipulated by the organization. And they've been unable to, you know, pay these employee benefits. And these, you know, some of these are just short-term obligations. These are not even long-term obligations. A recent report stated that the post office had debt exceeding their assets by 4 billion rand. So the value of their assets is at least 4 billion rand less than the obligation they have towards their creditors. So they owe 4 billion rand more at the very least. That's the minimum amount. Which led one of their creditors to actually go to the court and, you know, and ask for the court to step in. And that's what led to the post office being under provisional liquidation. So this means that the post office is technically insolvent. That means that the amount of assets, the value of their assets, cannot, you know, fulfill their obligations, which means they cannot fulfill their liabilities. So even if the post office gets liquefied or it's put under liquidation and they convert all the assets that they have into cash, into liquid cash, they're not going to be able to, you know, pay all the debt that they own. This is very sad, you know. But this is not new. We knew about this for the past 10 years. It's crazy now that Minister Gungubele is all of a sudden, you know, interested to understand what led to this situation in the post office. It's been happening for the past 10 years. This is not new. At least for the past decade, we've known that the post office is not doing very well. And it's only now that this so-called minister wants to, you know, have these meetings and conferences as usual and act as if they care. They actually don't. They actually don't care. That's why this country is going to go to the pits, man, because what's going to happen is that everything's going to be privatized. And you know, man, when private interests overrun social responsibility, we're going to have an extremely polarized country. The rich will get richer, as it's been happening, and the poor will get poorer, as it's been happening. South Africa cannot have that. We cannot have an ultra-capitalist society. Neither can we afford an ultra-communist society. We have to make work what we already have, the mixed economy. We have to make it work because of the unique history of this country. Well, not very unique, but the very obvious history of this country of racialized economic policies. We need proper government and proper governance. We need proper government involvement. These state-owned enterprises cannot go on being privatized. Same thing that's happening with Eskom, Prasa, and all other state-owned enterprises. We cannot have this where companies that are supposed to serve majority of the people who were systemically and by design excluded from the economy. So these state-owned enterprises exist for that reason now, to correct, amongst other things, the actions of the previous government. And the previous government, which is the apartheid government, they were also correcting the actions of their previous government, which was the British government, you see. So what the apartheid government did was to create policies that helped or served the Afrikaner people using state-owned enterprises. The majority of Afrikaners under apartheid were employed by the government. It's nothing new. And it had to happen. If the apartheid government wanted to really uplift the Afrikaner community, they had to employ majority of the people. And they had to make it work. They had to ensure that these government companies are actually doing very well. And that's one thing that ANC is failing to do. I have no idea why. Well, I do have an idea, actually, if I'm being honest. I think it's on purpose. I think it's on purpose that these companies are being destroyed. And it's sad because the private sector is waiting, man. They're just waiting just for one opportunity. And they're even creating that opportunity. They're creating the opportunity, they're taking over every single aspect of the country. And it's sad for those who voted for the ruling party in hopes that their lives would change because, things are not getting better. Things are definitely not getting better. At least when you look at the projections for the future, things are actually going to get really, really, really worse. And some of the reasons why things are going to get worse are reasons that are just very, very, very easily fixed if there was will, because there is capacity to fix these things. But if there was actual will to actually fix these things would be fixed. I always make mention of how during the lockdown, we seemed to not have any load shedding. And the lockdown was 2 years long. And yet we seemed to have no load shedding at all. In fact, for the past 10 years, we've only had more load shedding in the past 2 years. 2021, 2022, we had more load shedding than all the previous years. Do you understand? 2021 and 2022, we had more load shedding than all the previous years. So, back to the post office. Putting this company under provisional liquidation means then there's investigations that are ongoing, trying to find out what actually went wrong. But we know what went wrong. Corruption, money laundering, maladministration, people looking out for their own interests instead of looking for the future generations of this country. And this is exactly why these old guys who are in government, I don't care if they're in DA or they're in the EFF or in IFP, I don't really give a damn. But these people need to be removed, man. They need to be removed. We don't need them. They're completely irrelevant now. The world needs a different way of doing things. We're living in a completely different reality than they did when they were born 70 years ago. We've seen Singapore rise from, rubble, from nothing. India, from nothing. China, man, in the past 20 years, they've lifted at least 20 million people, 600 million people from poverty. 600 million, that's South Africa times 10. And they did it in 20 years. So if you divide 20 years by 10, that should be 2 years for us to lift everyone out of poverty. Only if there's a will, though. We need people with a strong will to actually make the right decisions. We know this country is run by a mafia. Oh, these Ruperts and your Oppenheimers, they're mafias, man. These guys are mafias. Those are the big boys, They've been running this country since the colonial ages. Their families came from Germany, France, Italy, England. Came here and, criminally took over everything. They still run everything. And they've got their black boys now running around, doing the rounds and serving them very nicely by destroying what these people have hope in. When the ANC destroys these companies that people have hope in, the ANC is doing the work of the devil. And we'll be criticizing the ANC, rightly so. But there's a hand behind as well. There's a hidden hand. There's someone who funded Ramaphosa's campaign. And it's that those are the people who are benefiting from what's happening in the country. The guys who funded these guys' campaigns. So what I'm saying is, we'll keep on hearing this kind of news unless we actually deliberately come together and organize. Now, this is the solution that I'm proposing. Not just for one thing, but for everything. We have to organize. expose what's happening and actually, not just expose it in our own circles, but really expose it and then use the legal system, which is now being captured or has already been captured. Use the legal system and our rights, because we do have a lot of rights that we're not taking advantage of in South Africa. A lot of people don't really know and understand their rights and the obligations of these people in office. These people are obliged. They are obliged to serve us. And if they don't serve us, we need to speed them out. And I think it's time to speed them out now. It's been time to speed them out. And no, the DA is not the alternative. What we really need now is people who love this country. I personally don't really go for party politics. I don't believe in political parties. Because I know it's really just about money, man. These guys are money launderers, they're criminals. I know there's good people in political parties. I know for a fact, because I've been involved in this whole political party thing. And myself, being someone who loves this country. So I wouldn't be so naive to think that there's no goodness in these political parties. I know for a fact there's a lot of goodness. A lot of people who want to, do the right thing. And a lot of people who are actually doing good things. There is. But then as a system, this thing of politics, political parties is not working for us. At least not now. Maybe it worked before 1994, up until 1994 when certain changes had to be made, and they were made. Now, new changes need to be made. This is a different struggle now. It's a really bad struggle, actually, because people were promised, and those promises have not been delivered yet. So this is our struggle. And if we don't fight to change this now, unfortunately, your children will be born and they'll be in debt already. They'll work for China. Your children will work for the USA. Your children will work for England. They'll work for Germany. They'll work for white elite South Africans. Your children will be slaves, just like your forefathers. If all we want to do is, enjoy vibes and groove entertainment, then we might as well be ready to be immigrants. Might as well be ready. We'll go to Nigeria. You'll have to learn to speak Igbo and Yoruba. You'll have to learn to cook jollof, Baba. Yeah, because this country will be falling apart. You will have to learn to speak Somali when you go to Somalia. Amharic in Ethiopia. You'll be an immigrant because you'll have no options but to run away when things fall apart. Unless us as this generation, I don't care if you're 15, you're 12, you're 9 years old, you're 30, you're 45, you're 50. If you can see that something needs to change, then you have to step the hell up. Step up, speak out, avail yourself to solve problems, Avail yourself. This is not a rocket science thing. We don't need a hero. That's why people are going crazy over Julius Mali, Mantlantla Lux, and all these guys. These don't need heroes, man. You are a hero yourself. You don't need saviors. You better step the hell up and actually take advantage of the fact that you have a brain that can function, you can think for yourself, and avail yourself, man, to solve the problems in your immediate surroundings. And if we all do that, then we're going to have a ripple effect in the country. There's an obligation. There is an obligation for us to step up. And the sooner we do that, the better. Because now this generation that's destroying everything, they're going to die soon. In the next 30 years. Very few of them will be around. Very, very few. By few, I mean maybe less than 100, maybe less than 10 people who are in parliament right now will be around in the next 40, 50 years, And we'll be stuck with a country that's in debt. We'll be stuck with a country that needs to outsource the printing of licenses and license cards to Germany. So this issue with the South African Post Office is not unique at all. It's happening in all other countries. Do you remember when the traffic department, when the machine that they use, which they say there's one machine, broke down? They had to send it to Germany to be fixed. And I know for a fact that machine could be fixed in South Africa. I know 100% it could be fixed here. But then they needed extreme fees. They needed to be charged high prices so that they could continue with money laundering. You have Thabo Bester now. They had to fly him, and then apparently the flight is like 1.4 million rand. I'm sorry, man. That's garbage. Money laundering. So these are not government officials. These are money launderers. These are criminals. These are thieves. And we need to call them out. If people call you disrespectful, it's fine. You're disrespectful, it's all right. But then you know the truth, because the truth is publicly available. It's not even hidden anymore. So the post office is under provisional liquidation. I think after the investigations are concluded, then they'll decide whether or not it's going to be liquidated. Then basically the company is going to stop existing as a state-owned company. Maybe someone's going to come through and buy it off and then run the whole thing as a private enterprise. But then what this means now is that people who get paid their social grants will have to go somewhere else. And I think Shoprite is preparing themselves for more business. You see? What's stopping Shoprite from being a bank then? I mean, they already are operating as a bank, really. If you go and study their financial statements, a lot of their money comes from financial investments instead of revenue and sales. So what's stopping them? If the post office fails and the post bank then fails together with the post office, then people will have to go to Shoprite to get their social grants anyway, because they already have the infrastructure in place. They're not stopping Shoprite from being a bank in the country. They already have millions and millions of customers. They can just, open a branch inside of any Shoprite shop. They have a branch and an ATM, 2 or 3 ATMs there, and then an office where you can just do your normal post office services in Shoprite, at Shoprite. You see, when these state-owned companies fail, private interests are satisfied. When these state-owned enterprises fail, private interests are satisfied. And trust me, it's not to the benefit of the people. Let's think about this for a minute. Peace, 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 peace.